Hello and welcome to Staying Home with Josh Fox, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal and why we're not going back. Today is an extremely special episode. Today, I am interviewing Anne Bogart. Now, you may not know who Anne Bogart is unless you're a theater person like myself. Anne Bogart is my mentor. Anne Bogart is my teacher. Anne Bogart is one of the most influential theater directors on the face of the planet and one of the most influential theater teachers on the face of the planet. She taught me when I was in college, and her company, the City Company, the Saratoga International Theater Institute, has revolutionized theater training, not just in America, but all over the world. These are all techniques that I have used in my own theater work, which I've done for years and years. And if you really know much about my work, you may know that my book, The Truth Has Changed, which is based on my solo performance, which I've done all over the world, but that I've run a company called the International WOW Company, which has made over 30 original works for the stage, premiering in New York and in Japan and in Thailand and Germany and all over the world. So we're going to talk about the theater. We're going to talk about how pandemics changed theater. We're going to talk about what does it mean to be an actor? What does it mean to be on the stage? What does it mean to be present? But as always in a conversation with Anne, and I'm sure this is what will happen, is a remarkable level of insight, not just into her area of expertise, which is the theater and being on stage, but also about life in general. So please stick with this. I'm sure it's going to be an absolutely thrilling conversation with my mentor, with my teacher, with my hero, with one of the greatest theater minds on the planet, director Anne Bogart. Anne, how are you?
First of all, I'm delighted to be here, and you have to know that you keep saying I'm your mentor, but based on your activities in the past years, you're my mentor.
Well, that's
and
rather...
I have to say, and I just have to ask you, you're doing this, what, 5 days a week?
Okay, so I do this show 5 times a week. We don't do every show a day. We do 3 or 4 in a day. So it's usually taped with 2 days a week. That's what we've got to now. At the beginning, I was doing it 5 days a week. With the beginning of this show, there were 50 people watching it on Instagram. It was basically me like interviewing my friends.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends, turns out. Friends in high places, friends in low places, as they say. And so now it's getting 100,000 views a day. So
that's amazing.
Pretty insane.
Has it been something to go through? I mean, doing it so often,
Yes.
It's a little like your Marina Abramovich with The Artist is Present. I mean, you're just present and you're asking questions and making observations. I mean, something must be happening to you.
The core of this show, which has been from the beginning, is something that Albert Maysles said to me, the great documentarian who made Salesman and who made Grey Gardens, who is a mentor of mine as well, who said to me about documentary filmmaking, he said, the whole process is a friendship. You get to know, and then everyone gets to know. And that was his precise wording. And I try to remember the precise wording of people like yourself and Albert Maysles. And the idea is that when you base your work in friendship, it's on a different resonant level. You know what I mean? There's a lot of interviewers that I've tailed along with reporters from Nightline when they were doing earthquakes in Arkansas because of fracking. And they would arrive with their trench coat and their microphone and their camera person. They would go, "What happened to you?" And the people would immediately be like, and you'd get a crappy interview. But if you go and hang out and be friends with people, the real thing comes through. And that is an unmistakable event, right? And it's not repeatable either. It's a captured thing, which is such a fascinating thing because most of my life has been in the theater. I'm completely obsessed with what's repeatable. But yeah, what I've learned about doing this is very bizarre because I do it 2 days a week. And the other 5 days a week, I'm out in nature with no cell phone, no electricity, in a one-room cabin, writing out the coronavirus, which I'm making a movie about, which is a whole other episode, right? So I'm a little bit schizophrenic right now. I'm like Mr. Nature Man, and I have another hat for that. And then this interview process, which is to me about dreaming. This to me is like the imaginal cells inside the cocoon, where people are dreaming the future and trying to learn something from this moment of isolation, which I think at first was extremely desperate and upsetting and hard. Yeah. And now has become a way of life. And and I think has centered and grounded a lot of people in a weird sort of way.
And are you making the coronavirus film by yourself? All you,
Yes.
just yourself?
Well,
So
I'm making it by myself with Greg King.
brilliant. I mean,
So
I say
I
brilliant, I
upload.
mean brilliant, Greg. I don't mean it's a
Greg is
brilliant idea
brilliant,
to
and
be.
Greg is hopefully making a film about the City Company. I know he's in the middle of doing that.
Yeah.
He's my editor for the last few projects, and a wonderful collaborator, also a great musician person with Rachel's. But Anne, so I have to ask you these things because there's just going over and over again in my mind.
But can I just say you used
Okay.
one of my...
I knew this was going to happen. I knew you were going to start interviewing me.
No, I'm not going to interview. I just want to say that you used one of my favorite central words a few minutes ago when you were describing what you're doing and how you deal with this interview of friendships. You used the word resonance. And that word to me is sacred right now. And as a matter of fact, I'm writing a book about it, and it's due in September. So I'm working very hard here in London, which is where I am in that really bad heat right now. And it's a book called The Art of Resonance. And it comes about, and I think you might find this interesting in terms of what you said about the Maisel's notion of friendship, is that, what is it that we do in our lives, right? What is it we're trying to do? And I used to think in the theater that what we do is we create memories, right? Is that, if you leave a production and you don't remember anything about it afterwards, I'd say that's a failure because you haven't created memories. And it turns out that memory is actually a protein that grows in the brain, and it's made by the heat of emotion, which creates synaptic pathways to that piece of protein. So then I thought, that's fabulous because we're making memories, and that's what we do in the theater. But then I was in a conversation not so long ago with our mutual friend, Leon Inglesroot, and Leon has, a family issue with Alzheimer's. One of his family members has it. And he says, Anne, he said, what about people who can't remember anything? And I really had to stop in that moment. And what I realized going through a lot of, personal thought is that it's not memories that are the most important thing. It's resonance. And I thought, I love reading books. So I read a lot of nonfiction. And while I'm reading, I get really excited and emotional, and I feel like I'm being changed as a human being. But then a week later, I can't even remember the name of the book, and I can't remember what happened in it. I can't relate, I just forget. And I realized, actually, that doesn't matter. That used to bother me. What happens is that you set up a resonance with something, another person, as you say, a friend. And resonance comes from the word to resound. So I'm making a sound and you resound with it, and we start to resound together. So when you use that word resonance, I just had to interrupt you because it's at the heart of what I'm thinking about. And you clearly, when you say I started out with very few people listening and watching, and now I have a lot of friends, that's because it is resonating. And what our job to do is to create resonances in the world, right? I mean,
it's such a fascinating.
Gas man created resonance, right? Why is that? Okay, I'll let you talk. Go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, first of all, I have to say every 11 minutes, you're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. This is Josh Fox. We'll be right back. You're tuned in to Staying Home with Josh Fox, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. My guest is revolutionary theater director Anne Bogart, who is also my mentor. But I wanted to mention, because when I first started, I finished your teachings, and not finished, but I finished a certain segment of them, right? Because they continued to resonate in 1995. And then I went after college, and I went to Thailand. And in 1996, I founded this company called International Wow Company, because the idea was, in many ways, inspired by your International Theater Institute, Saratoga International Theater Institute, the idea that international theater had to start to have a conversation. And I went there, and I had no idea what these Thai people were like. And they were asking me to teach them stuff and make a play with them. And so I taught them viewpoints, and we started doing viewpoints, and they were incredible movers. I mean, unbelievable. Like Liquid, we would go to dance clubs at night, and then we would go dance in the dance clubs, and then they would get bored of that song, and they would just sit down in the middle of the dance, in the middle of the discotheque, and then they would get excited again and go. It was this incredible Zen thing. So I didn't know what to do And I didn't know the language, I didn't know the culture. So I invented 6 questions to ask them, like an interview. What are you afraid of? What's your most basic daily routine? Tell me a story about leaving, because I was obsessed with leaving. What is one question you can't answer? And these questions became a basis of this table work that we were doing. And I started to think about the fundamental interconnectedness of the universe. So we were thinking about the theater like a pond, a pool, where if you throw a rock in, that's one element, and then you throw another rock in, and those splashes will come together it's called an interference pattern. And that is when the splashes and the ripples come together, that's that interference pattern. As it turns out, that's actually where your brain works, because your synapses fire in 2 different places or 3 different places at once. And though the firing of it creates a ripple like pond ripples. And that creates the thought. That the thought is these intermeshing interference patterns. And it's also, in fact, the way the universe works, because the stars are these ripples and the radio waves are hitting these. So we're in the middle of these resonances, as you would say, all the time. And as I'm isolating myself in the woods, there's a pond. This is very much like recreating Henry David Thoreau. And I have beavers
exactly what I
in
thought.
the pond.
When you've got this weird cross between Thoreau and then these programs. There's something in that's...
I don't know what's going to happen. But we're making the movie, and the beavers in the pond, we're doing this whole section about how the beavers are creating these ripples in the pond, and they're interacting with each other. And of course, there were 400 million beavers in the United States before the colonists came. And the beavers were also thought of as sacred by native people. And the beavers create where water goes. So that created this incredible landscape of the continent, of course, alongside of the gardening and cultivation of the people who lived here, which were then all, of course, killed by a pandemic. So all of these thoughts, there's a genocide
by a pandemic,
the smallpox pandemic that the Europeans brought. And of course, the genocidal wars were small consequence. But anyway, these are the thoughts that I'm having. And I'm wondering, because we're in a moment where there's no theater, where theater is like impossible. Theater, as I love the definition that you gave me, an unmediated event. An event that doesn't have this Zoom, that doesn't have a mediation there. How do you think this pandemic is going to change the theater? How have pandemics changed theaters in the past?
Yeah, so I think everything's going to change, and I'm sure that most of your guests say that. In other words, we can't go back to where we were, and that's a good thing. So the thing I've been thinking about the most in the last couple of weeks is, to answer your question in a roundabout way, is tents and tent poles. So, when I'm doing a play or an opera, I like to think that I'm creating an old-fashioned tent, So this tent is held up by tent poles. And what's happening now is, and I think about tents in the last couple of weeks, because a lot of people are trying to figure out what's going to happen to the buildings. We can't go in these buildings that are created by compression that want us to sit in the dark and be really close to each other and watch something presentational.
Right.
That the theater has to become places of radicalized meetings, a way of meeting and meeting differently. So a lot of people are actually starting to build tents or make tents or think of theater in the tents. But what's, for me, the key issue of this tent metaphor is that every time I make a play, if you imagine, or an opera, I'm making a tent. Now those tent poles...
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFDR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
That make this space for an audience are actually the principles that are holding the tent up. So like a really straightforward bunch of tent poles in a city company rehearsal is mutual respect, listening, training, you know, that these are the tent poles. So as an artist, what you do is you work on the tent poles, and then the tent is constructed, and then you don't control what's happening inside of it. It's the opposite of sort of pressure. So what we're doing right now is we're actually, and what we need to do is to concentrate on the tent poles. The tent poles have to change from what they were. The question is, what are they? And I think, and I haven't worked this part out, but there's something about the tensile architecture that's going to tell us something, and maybe you can figure this out. You know, I've been looking at Buckminster Fuller, you know, who of course created the geodesic dome and a lot of other things. And he said he was originally interested in looking at quantum nature. Electrons don't touch, the moon doesn't touch the Earth. And so he wanted to create, with the minimum means, a maximum effect or space. And that's what you do with a tent, right? With minimum support, you create this space. So I think what we actually have to do is to reimagine the architecture and reimagine and start to figure out what our new tent poles are that are holding up this event called the theater, which is an ancient event.
I love how you're saying that this is a value structure and not an architectural conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because theater is something, I'm in a theater right now. This is a theater that I built in my garage. And it seats about 30 people. And it was a garage, and we had no use for a garage because we could park the car outside, you know. And so we made it into a theater by painting it black and putting lights and whatever. But I actually, right outside there is a huge amphitheater. And I have a friend with a stage on the back of a pickup truck. And we're thinking about having people come and drive in, and I would do The Truth Has Changed, my solo show, and people would be in their cars in a safe atmosphere with a radio transmitter like a drive-in. So that's one very crude interpretation of what you're saying. But I think a lot about other kinds of architecture, what you're telling me, the value structure of the theater.
Yeah.
I just very famously got kicked out of the public theater in a very brutalizing fashion. And it occurs to me that the reason why was because the value structure of that place was so completely out of whack. And I wanted to say something to you because I don't know exactly what to do about this, because my theater work was my whole life. It was all I ever wanted to do. I never wanted to make movies. I never even thought about it. I made a film out of necessity to defend this nature. And then all of a sudden, people are paying attention, so let's make another one. Because in the theater, my political sensibility, which was the root of what I was doing, was never accepted and never encouraged and never housed. When we're talking about a tent, it never fit into any of the architecture of any of those major theaters. I think about Minushkin, R.A.M. Minushkin, whose work is incredible, huge productions, epic, very political, and how she had to create her whole place, the cartoucherie outside of Paris, just to house her vision of the theater. And for me, it was extraordinarily frustrating to keep banging my head against the wall of those institutions, which for me were, ruled by white moderates, by an ideology that was not listening to the revolution that we were preaching, that did not want to hear anything about our international dialogue of progressive political thought, and who just didn't get it. And all the critics were in that place as well, except for a couple of them that had a political consciousness. It was extraordinarily painful. So I wonder, and it still is, about that architecture. What do you foresee? Because I think about what are the new values?
The new values have to actually be inclusive and non-hierarchical. years ago, I mean, really years ago, I was on a panel financed by the Pew Charitable Trust, and it was at a fancy mansion in Tarrytown, New York, and a bunch of artistic directors were there. And it was like Gordon Davidson,
Okay,
God
right.
rest his soul. And at a certain point, Gordon Davidson spoke up and said, you know what, our theater should just be blown up. And I said, what? I sat up straight. I was an independent whatever at the time. He said, yeah, they should be blown up. This top-down hierarchical thing is not working. And other artistic directors started going, yeah, it's true. And I said, well, what do you see in its place? And I can't remember who spoke up, but it seemed to be agreed upon by these big artistic directors. He said, cells. I said, what do you mean cells? Well, we have these buildings, so we should have cells come in. I mean, the public has tried to do that. They had the Labyrinth Company, various companies come in and be part of the cells. And for a while, the Mark Taper Forum did the same thing. But the thing is none of these artistic directors ever gave up their jobs. I mean, they have they make a lot of money.
Huge amounts of money.
And
millions of dollars, actually.
And they have an incredible staff, and they have good, probably, they want to do the best they can. And so none of these theaters got blown up. They're getting blown up right now. And whether you say it's fair or unfair, in some ways it's unfair, because I would say some of the more, quote, liberal artistic directors are getting outed, and outed in every way that you can imagine, while as some of the most conservatives aren't, but that's a whole nother thing. But it is changing. That said, Josh Fox, you have an audience, and I've always believed that we are not in control of who our audience is. You do your work and your audience comes to you. I don't know that you and the public theater are a good fit. I remember seeing a play at Actors Theater of Louisville at the Humana Festival, and I hated it. I'm not going to say the name of the play. It was a one-person show. I hated it. And I was sitting next to my then girlfriend, Tina Landau, and I said, oh, that's not theater, I said to her afterwards. And she turned to me and she said, yes, it is theater. And that's the wonderful thing about theater, is it can be so many things. And I thought, you know what, busted, she's right. It can. And that is, in a sense, got to be one of the tent poles, is that it can be so many things. There are so many actor-audience relationships that have been, explored throughout history, but we forgot them. We've turned into a consumerist, expensive art form, and these things will change, and they're changing. So in a way, we have to, in a sense, accept that it's going to be many, many faceted, that we can't control who our audiences are, but we can actually create the tent poles, the principles, the tenets upon which we build a tent and invite audiences in.
You're tuned in to Staying Home. This is Josh Fox. We'll be right back. So we'll have more of our interview with Anne Bogart tomorrow, because it's such an in-depth interview. It's going to stretch over 2 episodes. But on the subject of resonance, we have Vicki Brown, violinist and composer, coming to us from Tucson, Arizona. It's like a magical visitation from a space or something. Far. Explain to us what you're doing here. You're using various different sounds. We can't see obviously what's down there, but what's going on here? That sounded like baby talk
Oh, so
at the
okay.
beginning. Tell us what's going on here.
Well, a lot of times when I create something, it's usually just is a painting, and then the theme usually arrives afterwards.
Okay.
And but yesterday I was thinking, what can I do intentionally? And I was running through my loops. I have a bank of loops, and I ran across my sister's son, who they live in Switzerland. And I recorded him like 3 years ago, and I ran across his voice, and I was thinking, that's what was, and now what is, and what will be.
Right.
And sort of to try and kind of put a structure around this experience that we're all going through.
Right.
What was, what is, what are we doing, what's in front of us right now, and what is to be. So that was my starting point, was my nephew's little voice. And I have this fantastic thumb piano.
Oh,
and I brought
was
in
wondering what was going on over there.
Yeah, so I have a thumb piano and a bass pedal and a whammy bar, and so I can create all these crazy swooping sounds with it.
This is the track that you have in Gasland. It's this very haunting violin track with a lot of different sort of delays on it, and it's when I'm driving through the desert throughout all these gas wells, and it does feel very much like searching on the wind in some way, like this. And so, what is it right now in terms of this moment of being in a cocoon almost as an artist? Are you finding? This is a moment which I think it's interesting, because when we go on tour and we're constantly playing out and we're constantly traveling, we lose the ability to sort of be as introspective as perhaps we would like, and this is a very important moment, I think, for artists to incubate and develop new things. So what is it that you're finding in this moment to develop?
Well, to be quite honest, I've been just going back to the mainstays, my classical music.
Mm.
It's solidifying, it's something that I know.
Mm-hmm.
And also, honestly, I'm not really producing a whole lot. I'm still working full time.
Right.
So touring is not in my purview necessarily. But I have other projects. I, collaborate with a friend in Australia on a new album. So that's coming down the pike. Another friend in town collaborating on a song. But as far as my own, creative productivity, I haven't really sat down to do much. It's
well,
it's been an interesting time, because it is, like when I hear people say, "Well, I just wrote a screenplay," or "I'm finishing my book," and I'm not envious, but I think, sometimes it feels like it's enough just to be. And I've been experiencing kind of levels of awareness about myself and what I'm doing, just in life in general, throughout this process. But
it's interesting that you say that, levels of awareness, that you think you know who you are and what you're doing, and then all of a sudden the day arrives when you're like, wait a minute, maybe I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, I think I know what I'm doing, but actually it's been, I don't know if it's a combination of just getting older, and then just with the circumstances that we're in. One thing I've loved is the stripping away of the veneer of everything. Everybody's just so real right now, and and
I hope so.
Vulnerable, and I feel like we're, yeah, I hope so. But I'm really, I'm falling in love with the stripping away, and realizing what really is, what do you really need? I ask myself that question, like, do I really need to do that? Do I really need that? And so,
I think that's really fascinating right now, because we have been deprived of a lot at this moment, right? We're being deprived of travel. We're being deprived of parties. We're being deprived of audiences. We're being deprived of human contact in so many ways. And when that happens, it's like, oh, that's what's really important in life. Do I actually need the blank that I thought was important but isn't? Do you know what I mean? The material thing or whatever it is.
it's just becoming very elemental. It's just the basics. And you know what it's like to be on tour?
Mm-hmm.
I love going on tour because your world is at your feet, literally. Like whatever is in your suitcase, as long as you grab your credit card, passport, fiddle, my bag, I always replace whatever's in my bag if I leave it at the train station. But I love that feeling of just not being encumbered. And I wish that would be an experience that a lot of people would have, because well, we could talk at length about the situation, but
right.
I think there's something so beautiful in the simplicity.
The feeling of not being encumbered. I'm writing that down. You're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. We'll be right back. You're tuned in to Staying Home, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. This is Josh Fox. We're back with Vicki Brown. Vicki, so I mean, I met you in Mexico City at a thing called the Interdependence Day, and it was organized by my great mentor Benjamin Barber, who passed away a couple of years back. And we had a lot of late night jam sessions, sort of like in the hotel lobby. I feel like I meet a lot of people at late night jam sessions in hotel lobbies. I don't know why that is. Like, you can always find a place in a hotel lobby to jam, and somehow the hotel people don't have any idea how to deal with you, because they're like, wait a minute, the musicians are playing in the lobby. What are we supposed to do? Kick them out, or we should let them play, or what should we do? You know what I mean? But you're not the first person on this program that I met in a late night jam session in a hotel lobby. But it was a really amazing event that was talking about how we're all interdependent, not Independence Day, right? And it took place on September 12th, every day after September 11th, to react against the isolationism of what was happening after September 11th and the war. This idea that we're all interdependent, that nations are interdependent, that people are interdependent. And there were musicians, and I was showing my film, and it was just an amazing moment. And there were panels, Dr. West, and so many others who were amazing. So what does this moment of isolation say about this idea of interdependence to you, Vicki?
Isn't that interesting? It's how we're finding our connectedness through our isolation.
I think it's a resounding notion that we need to think about now, because when we're talking about climate change, when we're talking about a pandemic, it's so clear that a pandemic happens because we are all interdependent, and right now, America refuses to follow the rest of the world. And as a result, we have become completely isolated. The United States will not do the things that China has done, that Italy has done, that Korea has done, that Germany has done, to stop the coronavirus. And therefore, no one around the world will accept us as travelers at this moment. And it's a very, very difficult time to do anything, because we refuse that notion of interdependence. We refuse that notion of a scientific community, of a political community.
It's flooring. It's astounding. I don't know what words can describe the frustration with this lack, just the willing. What do you say? It's the willing.
Willful ignorance, willful incompetence.
I'm a scientist. I have a PhD in psychology and measurement of behavior, and it feels like, should I just toss that out the window now? I'm being very with it, but it's so insulting, and you know what? I don't think that it's not the U.S. It's a hand. I feel like maybe it's not a handful. I hope it's not bigger than a handful.
Right.
But it's really
just a few people.
It's so disheartening. But I have to say, since the corona, so the work that I do is mostly revolving around building resilience in among rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. So traditionally, you know, we would fly to Nairobi, fly to, you know, wherever, do a training, meet with the locals, make sure that the data quality that they're getting is good. But now, you know, we've all been grounded and it's been great, you know. All that energy that used to go into just getting ready to go somewhere, to go to the airport, to get your meds, to be to the airport on time, the flying, everything, the recuperation time, it's all gone. And I love it. I wouldn't care if I ever had to get on a plane to go somewhere other than for my own, you know, leisure.
But are you still able to do the work even though you can't travel?
So we had to pivot very quickly because, you know, we have surveys going on continually. And so we had to pivot to phone surveys rather than face-to-face,
right,
with farmers. And so that has actually kind of been, it's exciting to see the world of development, international development, particularly from the US side. We go in and we train them and then we come back. But they are fully capable. You know, the capacity of other countries is really, you know, they're fully capable. And so it's really exciting to utilize this technology of having a training. We might have to get up at 3:30 in the morning, but using this technology to, you know, share the knowledge with them, and they can go out and do the job. We don't have to go there in person. And
right.
Just thinking about global emissions, all the flights, all that waste gone. And so hopefully that, you know, I don't know where we can bank that.
Well, I think we have to invent a new world.
Well, I think it's happening. You know, I don't know what the utility is. Other than, you know, the personal contact, it really is nice to go and see other places and experience all that, and, you know, meet people in person. But I really do think that this is revolutionizing the world of development. And I might say that we're still almost in a post-colonial phase. You know, this entering and leaving, and we're stripping away. I think we're finally stripping that notion away, and we are, you know, holding each other up rather than bringing another along, which is necessary, you know, too. But I think it's really exciting. It has, you know, this whole situation though has had its downsides too. I'm also really passionate about wildlife, and, you know, without revenue from tourism, poaching can go up.
Oh, I know. That's what's very, very scary.
That whole circle of everything, but.
Well, I think it's about finding new forms, new forms and new values, a different sense of values. Like you said, what is actually real and what is actually important. But is there possible to do a second piece?
Yeah, or? I'll do a second. I'll do another one.
At TYT, we frequently talk about all the ways that big tech companies are taking control of our online lives, constantly monitoring us and storing and selling our data. But that doesn't mean we have to let them. It's possible to stay anonymous online and hide your data from the prying eyes of big tech. And one of the best ways is with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN hides your IP address, making your active ID more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. And it's also easy to install. A single mouse click protects all your devices. But listen, guys, this is important. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by CNET and Wired Magazine. So take back control of your life online and secure your data with a top VPN solution available, ExpressVPN. And if you go to expressvpn.com/TYT, you can get 3 extra months for free with this exclusive link just for TYT fans. That's expressvpn.com/TYT. Check it out today.
Oh, terrific. Thank you so much, Vicki Brown. It's good to see you, and hopefully we'll catch up at some point in the future. That's all the time we have, but that was terrific. What was the name of that?
That's called Last of the Water.
Last of the Water. All right. Well, thanks so much for this and for the conversation. This has been Staying Home with Josh Fox, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of the Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.